that the head, the eye, the bill are all sharp, which this one is, and then I just wanted it to melt away after that. Once I kind of saw how they were flying in the areas they were flying through, I was able to change my position to take advantage of it. All right, and welcome to another episode of Wildlife Inspired. I'm your host, Scott Keys, and today I am joined with a talented photographer named Kevin Lippe. So Kevin, go ahead and say hi.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for tuning in to today's show.
All right, and just a quick background on how I met Kevin. Kevin came to me through Instagram. So I was following some work, and you see names pop up and you see images pop up. And there's actually one image in particular that actually got Kevin on the show. Like, I just saw this thing and I was like, I got to figure out who this guy is. So didn't really talk a lot to him, had been a real admirer. Most of his work was with owls, although he does a lot of different work. I think in today's images, we actually focused on owls. So Kevin gave me his top 10 owl images. And I thought that's a really great subject to talk about. So started following him, reached out, said, do you want to do the show? He said he'd be thrilled to do it. And I think you guys are going to really love this. So a couple things that I think we'll take out of the show is owl photography can be a little bit different. You're dealing with different circumstances, and it's certainly a different subject. There's some pros and cons, just like there is probably with every subject. So we'll kind of explore that a little bit. We'll talk a little bit about, kind of Kevin's background, how he got into this, and what really drew him to owls. I have a few other questions for him, so I'll throw those in there. And if you guys have questions, please, the chat box. I love to see these live questions come through. It gives us a chance to kind of answer your thoughts and to pick the brains of somebody who's obviously very, very talented. So feel free to drop in questions as we go. And I'm going to pull up Kevin's website right now. So hang on just one second. Let me see if I can figure out where that one is. And there we go. All right, so I've got Kevin's website out. It's called Crisp Image Photography. And I'm actually going to just pull up real quick his Instagram account. So on Instagram, you can find Kevin at Crisp Image Photography. So check him out there. And while Kevin's going through his kind of bio and telling us a little bit about himself, I'll just be scrolling through a multitude of images, and then we'll get down to his 10 favorites. So Kevin, go ahead, tell the group a little bit. First of all, how long have you been doing photography? How'd you get started? I find that's a great backstory always. And then just kind of what some of your interests are. So go ahead.
Yeah. Hey, well, thanks very much, first of all, for having me on the show, Scott. Really appreciate it. I've been into the serious photography for the last 5 years. 10 years ago, I would say, got started in digital. Prior to that, have always had an interest in photography. So going back to film days, shooting Nikon film camera bodies, and but not so much in wildlife. So I would say I started more with landscapes, and doing a lot of it was just to sort of document some of the trips that I was doing into the backcountry. I was really interested in mountain climbing and rock climbing. So that's kind of where my interest in photography began. And then I would say probably about 8 years ago, a really good friend of mine just sort of introduced me to photographing birds. And up until that point, I hadn't really focused on that at all. And that's kind of where it all started to take off. And the first images that I remember seeing were images of a snowy owl. We had I guess about 8 years ago, we had sort of an eruption year with the snowy owls, and there were quite a few of them here in our local saltwater marsh area. And so he was showing me these pictures of these snowy owls, and I was just completely blown away. And I was like, you gotta take me out and show me some of these owls. And that kind of is what got me hooked. So from that point forward, I just focused on primarily birds. And then, lately I've been looking a little bit broader, wildlife, mammals, different things. But I would say I've focused primarily on bird photography for the last 5 years.
And you're a true outdoorsman, right? Like this is an
I think
extension
so.
of you.
I
Yeah.
like to think that I am. Yeah, and I kind of got out. I kind of got out of the, with having a family. I got out of doing the sort of higher risk sports. Rock climbing, ice climbing, mountain climbing was a little bit. Didn't feel that it was the best fit
Right.
with having a young family. So I sort of put that aside and looked at doing things that would get me outdoors, and still wanted to have the camera in my hand.
Is it fair to say that this is so you don't, in other words, you don't shoot backyard images a lot, right? So you're going, and
Not
when
a
you do
lot,
these owls,
no.
these aren't like workshop owls. You're not paying somebody to take you out. This is your
No,
experience.
I've never paid for a workshop. All of my photos are pretty much taken in the wild. I wouldn't say I don't do any backyard stuff. I do absolutely love watching the hummingbirds and stuff that come into our backyard. And I live in an area, very fortunate because I'm kind of right up against a mountain. We have a ton of birds that come through the backyard, and literally just like hop my back fence, and I'm in the woods. So I don't have to go far to sort of get into the wilds of the backcountry here. So pretty much everything I photograph is in the wild, and none of it is workshop led. And most of it, I would say, is, for the most part, it's fairly local. To this point, I haven't traveled a lot to do photography. And, recently I did do a trip to, down south, done a little bit of photography in Washington State. But most of it is pretty local, so not too much traveling.
Yeah, you don't really, I mean, it doesn't look like you have to. I'm scrolling your Instagram now, by the way. It doesn't look like you have to travel much to get good stuff.
We're pretty lucky here in
Yeah.
BC. I mean, we pretty much have it all.
Yeah.
You can be, you can be in the mountains, you can be at the ocean. We have a pretty wide variety of wildlife. So I think that's what attracts so many people to this area. And we certainly do get a lot of people that come here specifically for owls, specifically for waterfowl. Because if you travel for, 3 to 4 hours into the interior of the province, you have a completely different selection of wildlife that you would have, here on the coast. So it's a great spot, and we're kind of smack in the middle of everything. So
Yeah. Yeah, I
no
think the only
shortage of
thing,
subjects here.
yeah, well, I love the East Coast. There's some stuff I am very, very jealous of. So owls is probably the biggest West Coast or Northwest. I've always wanted to get to the Pacific Northwest and British Columbia to shoot. I think we have warblers on
Yeah.
you. I think we get a lot more warblers than you guys do out there.
You definitely
Yeah.
have us beat there. And it's not certainly not something I have a tremendous amount of luck with. But again, it comes down to what you focus on. So this year I've focused a little bit more on photographing smaller songbirds, and it's actually really interesting, and it's a completely different technique used than photographing an owl. But it's definitely enjoyable. But yeah, you guys have us beat for sure on the colorful birds. Because everything out here, when I look at my photos, I'm like, this is just another boring gray bird.
Yeah.
And I see these brilliant birds from back east, and I'm just really drawn to the colors. So
Now, before we get into the 10 images, a couple things I like to clean up. And I forgot to ask the last couple guests, but I have this crazy infatuation with back button focus. So I'm pulling up my back button focus spreadsheet, and I just need to know back button focus, yes or no.
absolutely.
Oh, okay. Let me update the spreadsheet. Kevin Lippe, that is now 6 back button focus. There's the chart updated. 6 yes, 4 no. So
Oh, wow.
I don't know if I updated this chart right. I guessed. So maybe Simon and Colin and Daniel, if they ever watch this episode, they'll be like, "No, you got us wrong. We're not on that side." But anyway, I got them on this side of the yes back button focus. By the way, you're in very good company. So,
No, that's good.
all
That's
right.
good.
And
Yeah.
Canon or Nikon?
I'm currently shooting Nikon
Okay.
and had, but in a lot of my feed, especially if you go back a little bit further, I did shoot Canon for, probably, I would say about 8 years.
Okay.
And then made the switch about 2 years ago. So yeah, I'm one of those.
Okay. If you when we're going through these, if there's anything interesting or unique, I kind of make the assumption that everybody shoots a longer lens, a 500 or 600. Some people might shoot a 400. What is your go-to lens?
I would say my go-to lens right now is kind of between two different lenses. The 500 f4e, the FL. That has been that's my primary go-to lens if if I have a choice. That's what I'd like to go with. A lot of times circumstances, mean that I can't necessarily pack the big lens. And so my second choice would be the 500 PF.
Okay.
And both of those are just, yeah, absolutely phenomenal. Super happy with the performance on both of them. And yeah.
Okay. All right, I'm going to pull up if there is anything unusual as we're going through here. I didn't, as I looked through the 10-inch, I didn't see anything that was like wide angle. But if there is anything unusual outside of that, feel free to throw that in. Or if you used a body. Now, you are currently using a DSLR, not a mirrorless, correct?
I actually use both now. I would say 90% of the images that I've shot, more than that, all been shot with DSLR. I've just recently added the Nikon Z6 to the mix, just to have another tool in the toolbox, and to kind of familiarize myself with what is inevitably going to be the future of photography, I think, going forward.
I think the initial feedback I'm hearing from people is kind of some pros and cons. And I think that the biggest con seems to be the ability to track anything moving, that the autofocus just hasn't caught up to the DSLR, at least in the Nikon system.
Yeah, I would say on the Nikon world, we're definitely, lagging behind in seeing anything that can give us the performance that we're used to of a DSLR. And my primary reason for adding the mirrorless into the mix was mainly because I have really focused a lot on low light photography of owls. And in a lot of that type of photography, you really don't need that blazing fast autofocus. And what I have found is that the mirrorless has provided me with quite a few advantages in other areas beyond focus. Just the electronic viewfinder, for one, is just a game changer, I think, for photography in general. Being able to see your exposure, being able to see the histogram, knowing right away, whether or not you're going to blow that shot or not, is a really, significant factor for making that switch. Also, the silent shutter, I think, is huge. Yep. It's those two things, especially with photographing owls and any, even the more sensitive owls. They're pretty tolerant when it comes to noise or even getting close to them.
Yep.
But for somebody like you, shooting a warbler, or something like a kingfisher, super skittish bird, I got to really see how much of a difference that makes. So I absolutely, have embraced mirrorless. I hope it gets better. I look forward to improvements. But I am using the Z6 with the version 3 firmware update, and I would say it's definitely not like the D5. It's not doesn't have the blazing fast autofocus, even for a subject that is static, and
and I think
everything's slower.
I think for me, waterfowl is one of interest because you don't really need the until they're in flight, but just floating by duck, autofocus really isn't a major concern. But the silent shutter probably a big deal.
Yeah, I used the Z6 a lot for loons this year, and I found it performed very well. There was no issue with the focus keeping up or tracking or anything like that. I would say I probably photographed more loons with the mirrorless this year than I did with the D5. So, but yeah, beyond that, I'm primarily shooting either the D850, the Z6, or the D5.
All right. I'm going to pull up your first image. As I did, I took a sip, and I want to say on Instagram, I got a lot of feedback that they notice I sip on bourbon during the show. I also want to put this out there. If
Wow.
there's anybody who watches this who owns a distillery, I will be happy to promote your bourbon on this show for free bottles. I work cheap. So if you know a distillery, feel free to let them know. Send me a message, and I'll drink your bourbon on the show and do whatever you want. And again, $35. Send me the bottle. I work cheap. All right, I got your first image up, Kevin. I think I know owl species, but I'm always afraid that I'm going to miss something up, especially if you put a spotted owl in here. But I think this is a pygmy owl.
It is a pygmy owl.
All right.
You passed the
All
test.
right. All right. Tell us a little bit about this one.
So yeah, this is the northern pygmy owl. We kind of have a range of owl photos here today. So the northern pygmy owl would be the smallest. These little guys weigh anywhere between like 60 and 80 grams, or like, 2.5 ounces roughly.
Oh, wow.
So a really tiny owl. And this is one of the first owl species that I ever photographed. And I think that's kind of why I'm really intrigued with them. Also, they're quite elusive. They're not the easiest owl to find. And, much of that is just simply the size. They're incredibly small. These guys are probably one of my favorite owls to photograph. And part of that is just the game of finding them.
Yeah.
It's really difficult.
One of the things I noticed with this species is, and correct me if I'm wrong, because I have zero experience, so I'm only going with what I see in people post. Do they tend to perch at the top of trees sometimes, or at the top of perches? Or is that just luck?
Nope, they're often at the very top of a tree.
Okay.
They're kind of tricky because you really have to look for these owls at the right time of year. If you went out and tried to find one in the summertime, you'd be pretty hard pressed to find one. These owls, for me, I have the best luck in really late fall or through the winter.
Are they juvenile birds, you think? Is that why they're easier to find?
No, it's. I usually find the adults. Usually, as a kind of the thing with the northern pygmy owl is they're a vertical migrator, so they tend to spend a lot of their summer months at a higher elevation. So if you're spending a lot of time in the mountains and you're up kind of above 3,000 feet, up to even to the tops of some of the summits, I have found them in those areas. But if you're looking, down at sea level in the summertime, it's next to impossible to find them because they tend to migrate vertically.
Okay, we looked when we went to Alaska. Theo and I, we looked on every tree for at least 500 miles, and we were just thinking, oh, eventually there's one just going to be sitting at the top of one of these little trees off on the side. We never saw one of these things, man. We were dying. I wanted to see one so bad.
And the crazy thing is, they're so small. They're not much bigger than a pine cone in some cases.
Yeah.
So often when you're looking for these owls, you're looking through the binoculars and you're scanning trees. You can literally stare right at them and not even notice that they're there.
And when
they
you
really blend in.
When you do find them, they're not they don't tend to flush, right? Like you can get kind of comfortable with them, right?
They're usually super comfortable with people. I've even had some that are extremely curious. People often reach out to me and they want sort of information as to how they can find the species. So I'm usually, able to give them a few pointers. And one of them certainly is the time of year that you're looking for them. And then second of all is, some of the easiest ways to there's nothing easy about getting them to come close to you. It usually will, once you've found where they are, and you spend a little bit of time with them, they will eventually come down and start to hunt. And that's typically when you're going to have the opportunity to get photos of them.
Gotcha.
A lot of times they'll be curious if you do use any call playback. to attract them, they're quite curious and will often come to investigate that sound. That being said, a lot of times they will just stay, 150 feet up the top of a large tree, and they'll just be looking down at you, and you'll never have an opportunity to photograph them. But typically, in the evening or early mornings, I've had more luck where these owls will come down and they'll just start hunting. And they typically hunt in clear-cut areas, and they prefer the sort of the edge of a forest. So anywhere where there's a forested area where they might be nesting, there's some larger old growth trees. Here we don't have a lot of old growth left. It's a lot of second growth forest. And then so these owls are often found sort of on the borders of these second growth forests where there's been a lot of logging activity, so it forms a clear-cut area.
Right.
And that typically is their favorite hunting area. So if you spend a little bit of time around these areas, listening is really the best way to find them. Their call is very distinct, and you will hear this repetitive tooting sound that they make, and they have a trill call that's quite unique, and that call is kind of a giveaway as to where they are. And if you spend a little bit of time with them, it just takes a lot of patience. They're really they'll really test your patience.
Yeah.
And but that being said, I've had these owls. They're very bold. They'll often, if they're hunting and you can be standing 10 feet away from them, and I've had these owls land literally like right at my feet, and catch a vole or a grub. They see things that we don't even realize are around.
Right.
And they're extremely bold. So
yeah, love the composition.
Very cool. Wow.
Yeah, love the composition on this, and I don't know if because the video is a little bit tougher to see the quality. I will tell you, if you go to Kevin's Flickr page, so just go on Flickr if you've got it. You probably don't even need an account, but just search Kevin Lippe on Flickr. There's an album there called 10 Images, and you can go on that album and follow along. I'm reluctant to do that because it allows you to get ahead, but I should have probably saved that to the end. But if you go on there, you'll be able to see the raindrops in that image. I'm going to fast forward a little bit here to the next image. This is a short-eared owl coming into some kind of like viney perch situation. Looks a little dangerous.
Yeah, these are actually blackberry brambles.
Okay.
And the short-eared owls, I had never seen a short-eared owl actually land or perched on a blackberry. We have these brambles up here as well. But this photograph was taken down in Washington, and some good friends of mine down in the Pacific Northwest there had invited me up to photograph some of these short-eared owls with them. I returned to the area on my own on a visit while visiting family, and spent a little bit of time. I think it was definitely winter. You can definitely see there was some snow on the ground there in the background, and it was an overcast day. And I found this one particular owl that was very active, and I really wanted to get a shot of them. I wasn't expecting to get one landing so focused here on the blackberry brambles, but I'd really wanted to get a shot of one of these owls, even just perched on these blackberry brambles. And this one here, I managed to just catch it as it was coming in behind me, and I turned and fired off a burst. And I just really liked how focused this owl looked as it was navigating in between these prickly branches, because this is not something that you would normally see a larger owl, perched on. They just don't really even look like they're strong enough to support their weight.
Yeah.
But what was kind of funny about this area is it was only the second time I'd been there, and I didn't know the area super well. And this area is shared with hunters. So shortly after I took this photo, the owl stayed perched for quite some time. So I was working around trying different angles, completely oblivious to the fact that a hunter had been behind, not probably 100 meters away. and he was approaching me, and I turned and looked, and I see this guy decked out in full camo coming out of the grasses, and I was like,
Not happy.
he's no camera, it didn't look, he wasn't, didn't look particularly
Yeah.
happy. And I thought, oh gee, like, have I gotten a little bit, and I really didn't even realize that there was anybody out there in the blind. I knew the blind was there, but I hadn't seen any vehicles. I hadn't seen any sign of anyone. It was dead quiet. And anyway, he approached and asked if I was from the area. And so I said, no, I'm just, I'm visiting, and I'm actually visiting from Canada. So I think as soon as I said that, he kind of took pity on me. And he started to explain to me that I was too close to his hunting blind and potentially affecting his hunt.
Right.
But he was very kind and pointed out to me that he kindly left his rifle behind before coming out to chat with me. So I thanked him profusely for that.
Yeah, I've had a couple run-ins with hunters. I think if you're out doing wildlife photography enough in certain areas, you definitely run across hunters. Some are very, very pleasant. Others are very jumpy. I actually got shot at once by accident.
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah. We had this old like hunting field. It was a pheasant field, and it was just, I hate to say it, but there's a bunch of old timers out there like hunting pheasants that are stocked and can barely fly. Like, it's not much of a sport, but they're just so jumpy to shoot anything. And I see them coming down. I see the pheasant, and my car's parked because I'm photographing raptors. Tons of raptors in this field because they're probably hunting all these pheasants that are left behind by these hunters too lazy to pick them up. And I see the pheasant. He's right in my car, and I see these hunters walking. They don't see the pheasant yet. And I'm like, oh, this is going to get interesting when they see the pheasant, not realizing I was in the line of fire. So literally they see the pheasant, they spin around, they start shooting at it. I should have just gotten the hell out of there earlier when I figured out, what was, yeah. But yeah, if you're out there long enough in the wild, you definitely, and I have some friends who have some pretty crazy stories about, like literally bullets whizzing past, like rifle fire whizzing past their heads. So yeah, if you're out there enough, it's crazy. I'm going to pull up the next image, Kev. Now, this one you included, and we talked a little bit about this before the show. You said this was probably your most popular image ever. So explain that a little bit, kind of what publicity this got and how much attention you got from this one.
Yeah, this was kind of weird because as you and I spoke, sometimes your most popular image is certainly not your favorite image. And it's not, there was nothing about this image that made it a favorite. It just gained a lot of popularity. And I think, but there was kind of a cool story behind this image. So this was taken 2 years ago, and I was in an area looking for, obviously, I was looking for a great gray owl. I certainly wasn't looking for a nest, and I certainly wasn't expecting to find anything like this. And in this situation, we were walking through the forest. It was mid-afternoon. The light was terrible. It was super contrasty. It was hot. There were bugs. And we were really just, killing time, waiting for the sun to get down and waiting for evening. And we got caught up photographing these three-toed woodpeckers, and we were chasing them around through the forest. And I was photographing this woodpecker, and then I lost track of it, and it went toward this tree that was heavily pecked apart. And so I'm scanning up and down the tree, and as I got to the top of the tree, I noticed in between this sort of fingers of bark, I just noticed this head rotation, and it was like it all happened in slow motion. And what had caught my attention was there was a lone feather attached to the side of this tree, and it was just blowing in the wind, and it looked like a great gray owl feather. So when I scanned to the top of the tree, sure enough, at that moment, this eyeball went past through this little hole in the bark of the tree.
So you did not know this nest was there?
So I had no idea that the nest was there at all. Like it was a discovery, and
I'd be going crazy.
So yeah, at that moment, and I was with some friends, and I just kind of, you know,
I wouldn't have told my friends either. I would have just taken
well,
the shots and left.
the thought kind of, ran through my head for a second, but no, I was just at that moment, I was just super
Oh, you guys
excited,
missed the Great Gray?
and I wanted to let them know, but I was like, at the same time, I didn't know if this was a nest yet. I suspected it could be, but at that moment, I thought it might just be an owl that is perched up there and roosting, and so I, quietly kind of came back, and I'm trying to call to my friends and get their attention, and they're all like completely distracted with these woodpeckers and looking the other direction. So I finally rounded them up, and we slowly walked around and got to the other side of the nest that had a little bit more of an open view, and then we could definitely confirm that this was indeed a great gray owl nest. We had no idea what stage it was at. We didn't know if it was sitting on eggs and at what stage they were at. But we knew at that moment that we had made a pretty awesome discovery.
Amazing.
And I think this. So I didn't take. This wasn't the photo that I took. When I initially made the discovery. I took this a little bit later, and it was just trying to capture that initial glimpse that I got of just how camouflaged this owl was.
Yeah.
In this nest, and just that one single, eyeball staring out.
Yeah.
So I think even though it's, the light is pretty harsh and it's contrasty, and it doesn't have a lot of the other elements that I typically like in my photos, the story behind it and how it kind of launched me on this 3-month fascination with just, learning everything I could about great gray owls and being able to watch from this point until these owls fledged. It was a really cool experience.
Well, I think I told you
I gained a lot of knowledge.
When we did the pre-show, I told you this was probably my least favorite of your 10, but every time I see it, I gotta admit, I like it a little bit more. It is really freaking cool. So I can definitely.
I posted it. I posted it to Instagram and shared it because I thought that I was really doing it as part of sharing a longer story. This was sort of the beginning, and of course seeing the fledged owls at the end.
Yeah.
So it was really part of a larger story. And when I posted this, it just got picked up, I guess, by a few hubs, and it was featured over and over. And then a couple of the news agencies in the UK had contacted me, and they asked if they could share this image. So this image wound up being published in the UK Daily Mail and a couple other outlets.
Very cool.
In the UK.
Yeah.
And so it gained a lot of traction, and it gave me a little bit of exposure.
Yeah, very cool.
But like I said, sometimes you just don't know what is going to be popular with your audience.
Yep.
It is not always, what you think of as a favorite image.
Yep.
But it was certainly a highlight of my photography that particular season. And that went on for months.
All right. Let me pull up this next one. This looks like a juvenile. It's kind of peeking around the tree here. This is I would assume it's a barred owl by the eyes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That is a juvenile barred owl that I found this year. And this was another case of really not going out specifically to look for owls. We've had this year, there's been, I think because of COVID, early on, a lot of our parks were closed. We just didn't have people around. And I think the owls took advantage of that, and they wound up nesting in a lot of areas that they don't normally nest, just because of the number of people that are normally in those areas. So this was a park that's quite close to me, and I wasn't down there looking for owls. I was actually chasing around a Pacific wren. And I walked into this little park, and I could hear this wren just, belting out its song. And I thought, I'm just going to go and see if I can get some photos of this wren. So as I'm photographing this wren, and he's up on this little perch, I hear the distinct call of a barred owlet. And I look up, and here's the owlet right above me, like looking right down on me, and just sort of, probably like, 12 15 feet above me in a tree. And it wasn't long after I, immediately was done with that wren, and I was just on to these owls because that's usually what I do. And I went back to this area, almost every night, just to kind of see how these little owlets were doing. And I always like photographing these guys because they're a lot like little kids. They're just so mischievous and curious. And the great thing about this was that there was nobody else around. There were no people in this park. There were, and by this point we're looking at like late June.
Yeah.
But just, there was nobody around, so I could go in here in the evening and not be bothered by anyone, which is always a great experience when you're doing photography, to just not have crowds and crowds of people around that tend to influence the behavior of the wildlife you're trying to photograph. So this was just a great one-on-one experience where I was able to, document some of these little barred owlets.
Have you ever so I know in your area up here, somebody spots an owl or sees an owl, it's like, oh my gosh, where's the owl? Everybody goes, and somebody sent me a picture of like 48 photographers. Do you find yourself in those situations, or do you just like not even?
I try to avoid anything like that. So it happens all the time, especially with owls. They attract so much attention, but for me, it really doesn't matter what I'm photographing. I really don't like to be in crowds of people.
Yeah, I'm the same way.
So I tend to avoid, anything that's been discovered on eBird and that people have shared on social media.
Yeah.
There were numerous barred owl nests that were just inundated with photographers this year. 50, 60 people in these parks, and there was no social distancing. There was no measures being taken to sort of limit numbers, and that kind of thing just turns me off completely.
You're a little bit like me in that you don't share like if you find this owl, that's your owl, right? Like you're not. Yeah, maybe you tell a couple close friends, but you're not. I
might tell a couple of close friends.
Yep.
Yeah, but I don't. Yeah, certainly not something. I'm not going to post. A lot of times I don't post things to social media immediately.
Same. Yeah.
I try to wait, especially if it's a sensitive species or something like an owl. It's a bit of a game. People are always trying to find out where you're at, what you're photographing. Yep. I experienced that with the great gray owls in previous years, and then this year, seeing a lot more traffic in the area. Everybody trying to sort of get the same shots, and it's difficult. So I'm always trying to kind of avoid the crowds, mainly because I just find for myself, it's not to be selfish. For me, the personal experience of photographing wildlife when it's a one-on-one experience, or even just maybe one other photographer, I find the experience just to be that much more intimate, and the wildlife, the way it responds, to you being there is very different. So although owls are quite tolerant, you can often get close. They will often continue to hunt. I've also noticed that when you do go to these areas and you are by yourself, or even if you're, spend a little bit more time trying to be discreet, and watch them just in their natural environment, their behavior is very different. Yeah. And that's what I kind of want to capture.
Yeah, I 100% agree. And I think, I don't think it's selfish. Like, I don't think there's any reason to, and I would just encourage people. I saw somebody the other day sharing location, and it wasn't like it was, it wasn't like an amazing species, but the more we share locations as photographers, the more other people, especially newer photographers who may not be as adept at, concealing themselves or not disturbing wildlife. And listen, we've all seen that person who's just trampling on an area and just, like literally just destroying an area to get a better shot, or like endangering a species to get a better shot. That person is going to find that owl or that shorebird or that location. I just encourage people not to do it. And I know that's just me. In the comments, if anybody wants to elaborate or put their thoughts on that, but I just encourage people, if you put a general area, but even when you post on time, it's almost inevitable that somebody's going to ask you. And like you said, sometimes if I get a species, I just sit on it for a while. And I mean, what's the rush? If I'm the only one shooting it, well, who cares? There's no rush to post it today or tomorrow. I know it's exciting to do. Sit on it for a few months, and then when somebody asks you, you could say, "Oh yeah, I shot that, last fall, and the birds moved on." And you've protected the owl. You still got the same pictures, like nothing changed. And it also avoids that very awkward situation. I'm sure you've been in this, where somebody you kind of know but not your best friend says, "Hey, where'd you shoot that owl?" And now you're in a position to either say, "I'm not going to tell you," and you're a jerk.
Yeah.
Or I am going to share it and risk the chance that you now tell 10 friends who tell 10 friends. It's like a sexually transmitted disease of locations. And all of a sudden everybody's infected. So, I just encourage people who are listening, if anybody listens to this show, just think about that when you're posting. It doesn't even have to be a sensitive species all the time. But sometimes just a popular location can get so popular that it disturbs the habitat, or the location then closes or becomes you show up one day and all of a sudden there's barriers posted and you're like, what the hell's going on? Well, you find out some guy was in there last week and park rangers got involved, and now the area is closed because somebody was abusing that location.
Yeah, we see that a lot. And I mean, especially in local areas where, people will go in and they'll start actually cutting down trees,
Yep.
cutting down branches, doing whatever they can to get the shot. And I think that's, definitely. I always try to think of preserving as much of the habitat, and just trying to keep your impact as light as possible.
Yep.
Because we're seeing this not just with the wildlife, but the habitat, the areas that these animals call home. They're usually sensitive. They can only handle so many people at once. So when you go back to these areas and you see them trampled, it really makes you realize just what an impact we're having.
Yeah.
Whether you're there for shooting landscapes or you're there for wildlife, social media is having that effect on so many different areas, and so I'm always really careful.
Yeah. Okay, if we could go on to the next one, I've got the hawk owl up. Now, this is just pretty much a beautiful, clean portrait and great light. The editing on this, and just real quickly touch on your editing. Pretty light editing, right? Like you don't do, like you're not spending
an hour.
I don't
go crazy.
Okay.
No. Oh no. And that's the one thing is.
Are you good at it, or is this not something like you just don't spend a lot of time? You don't need to.
I just find that I much rather get things as good as I can in camera, and I don't really like sitting at a computer. I'd much rather be outside. So I'm just one of those people that doesn't do well sitting at a computer for very long. So I try to edit things in a manner where my workflow is. I would say the longest I might spend on an image is 10 minutes.
Okay.
And I find that if I have to spend any longer than that on an image, then I probably didn't do something right to begin with. So
Gotcha.
That's just my philosophy, and that's kind of just the way I work. But yeah, this one here, Northern Hawk Owl was, this hawk owl became quite famous. I know you've had other people on the show.
Same hawk owl.
His images.
Is this
same
the same
hawk owl?
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. And that's because hawk owls are not terribly common in this southern range. This guy had come down considerably further south than their normal range.
Was this in British Columbia, or
this is in BC?
Okay.
This is in British Columbia, and this is about 15 minutes from where I live. So,
wow.
I didn't mention it earlier, but yeah, I live just in the suburbs of Vancouver. And so this is just to the east of Vancouver. And yeah, this guy showed up and called these farm fields. It was like an area where there was a lot of blueberry fields. And this owl just hung out there for a couple of months. And it became quite a sensation. So we had photographers, I think, as far away as the East Coast of the United States. Certainly a lot of people coming up from down south of the border, just because he became a bit of a sensation.
Well, so I'll tell you what, if you find him again privately, just you, call me.
Yeah,
Because
for
you'll
sure.
be +1 East Coast photographer who will never tell a soul.
Exactly.
All
Yeah.
right.
This was one
I
of
would
those
like to
situations.
photograph one of these before I die, by the way.
Yeah. And I like this because it was this owl provided plenty of portrait opportunities for a number of photographers. But because the backgrounds were quite unique here, he was often perched against a field of, blackberries in winter. So of course they provide this lovely purple and magenta tones. So this was just one evening, a little bit more side lit, with a nice clean background. So didn't really have to do much here. It was really just a matter of waiting for the light and getting the exposure right in the camera.
Yeah, beautiful. Let me go on to the next one. Now, this one you've got a great gray, pretty straightforward, except he's got a little vole, it looks like, down there. I didn't notice this the first time. It also looks like he's trailing some, I don't know if that's,
he's trailing, yeah, he's trailing some of the vegetation.
Yeah.
So this was immediately after, this is the same year that I discovered the nest, and that turned out to be kind of a bumper year for great gray owls in the interior of the province. So these are not really close to me. I have to travel a little bit to photograph these owls, and knowing, of course, when you know where the nest location is, you can kind of predict the owl's movements because they start hunting in the same areas over and over. And they typically will fly toward their nest to take the prey back to the nest. So this was one of those opportunities where we kind of knew where the owl was going to hunt and also which direction it would travel. A lot of times you don't have that knowledge, so it's you're just sitting there waiting and hoping that you're standing in the right spot. This was one of the situations where we were able to actually capture a lot of head-on incoming shots. And this is all natural. Like there's absolutely, I don't do any baiting or luring of these owls. Good. This is just all natural hunt.
Yeah, we didn't talk about that. So I'm glad you mentioned that, because I do like to, with each get, honestly, like I'm not trying to be like holier than thou, but I don't think I have any guests on that do that baiting thing. It's just something I try to avoid. So
no, and it's another reason why I really haven't been able to bring myself to do workshops for owls. It's why I don't have, incredible shots of certain species. And that comes down to the fact that for a lot of species, including the great grays here in British Columbia and in Alberta, we do see a lot of baiting, especially for workshops. And it's just something that I can't, ethically, I won't go there. So any of the shots that I have are just, you just have to, I find if you put in the time, and that's the thing is if you're doing a workshop,
you don't have the time.
Chances are you don't have the time. You're sometimes flying overseas, to get to locations, and you've paid all this money. And of course, whoever's running the workshop wants to do their best to guarantee you a shot. But for me personally, I just find that, I have to feel that, nothing was done to jeopardize the well-being of the animal before I'll photograph it. So
do you happen to know the shutter speed on this one? Because I would imagine shooting a bird in flight at dusk is probably pretty tough.
Yeah, it's and this is a situation where I think I'm riding that fine line of, having a shutter speed that is just fast enough if you're kind of panning with the owl. And it's kind of in a glide here. But you can see that there's just there's a little bit of wing blur. But yeah, this is, I don't know if I have it. Is it in the Flickr?
I checked Flickr and I didn't see it there. If you know, but I would imagine. So at dusk, what is the slowest shutter speed? So you're using it, like if they're perched, you're using a tripod, yes?
So this was handheld.
But if they're perched, like you always have a tripod with.
I would say most of the time I'm shooting on a tripod. Anything that's in flight, though, I tend to not be on the tripod, even if I have a gimbal and everything. A lot of my, in-flight shots that I've taken are taken without a tripod. I find as soon as I'm married to a tripod, I miss probably 70% of the shots.
So if the bird, like for example, so you're shooting portraits, you're on a tripod, bird leaves the nest, you know it's hunting, it's going to come back, camera comes off the tripod, you're ready for a flight shot.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Yeah, I think that's good, and I think the reason I respect this shot so much is I kind of get the sense that the shutter speed has to be low because you just can't shoot at, you're shooting an osprey midday catching a fish, jack it up to 1/4000th of a second in the middle of the day. It's pretty easy, but when you're panning at, I don't know, 1/100th of a second, it's pretty tough. And so that's why I was kind of curious about the shutter speeds because when you're shooting at dusk, it becomes a real challenge. Some people will just go to straight motion blur and go artistic at that time of day. You get the sense that this isn't in the middle of the day. It does kind of feel dusky just by the light, which I really like. So I just think there's definitely a skill in hand holding and panning at a slower shutter speed. So I think not only is it a beautiful image, but it's one that is pretty tough technically to do when you're just hand holding.
And this was shot. I know it was around 300 millimeter.
Yeah.
It was shot on the D850 with the 200 to 500. And I remember the ISO being a little bit higher on this image because of the surrounding light, the dark background. But it was an overcast day. But typically I would say it's probably around 1,000th of a second.
Okay.
And I would say I rarely go below that, maybe 800th of a second.
Even with portraits?
With owls. With portraits, I'll go really slow.
Okay.
So I would say most of the portrait shots that we've looked at, some of those are down, especially if I'm on a tripod or if I'm using the Z6 and I've got like a 70 to 200. I think that one of the owl peeking out from behind the tree, that was actually shot at a 40th of a second handheld with the 70 to 200 2.8. So I've found that combination works pretty good. Same with the 500 PF. I can handhold that lens down to some very, very slow shutter speeds, even if I'm handholding. So yeah. Okay.
Let me run on to this next one. This is another pygmy owl. This one looks like it's just perched at the top of like some kind of a tree trunk. You've got the side light here. So, interesting because a lot of people think you have to shoot with light at your back. And I always encourage people to experiment with light. I think side lighting can add a lot of drama to an image. So I do really like this one.
Yeah, this was another pygmy owl that is in a location that I've photographed at a number of times. And I've always kind of wanted to see this pygmy owl perched on this particular stump. I have friends that have photographed this owl on this stump or something similar, and I've always missed that opportunity myself. So this was an incident where I wasn't really expecting to get this shot, and in fact, I was packed up, ready to go home, and I was driving by and noticed that the owl was in this was hunting right at the edge of this road. So I stopped and we pulled out the camera and just kind of waited a while. And fortunately, it flew up from where it had been hunting and landed on this stump. And it wasn't there for very long. I had to take this handheld. I had the big 500 on with the teleconverter. So I was 700 millimeters on the D5, and I can remember I was having to kind of back up, and I framed it vertically. And I really had to kind of stand in just the right position because in order to get that background and to get that little bit of light to kind of separate the dark side of the owl with the background, required sort of standing in just the right spot. There's a clear cut in the area, and the background trees are a distance off, but a lot of them are bare and there's no green on them. So you wind up with these sort of streaks of light. So this was kind of one of those tricky situations where you really had to think about where you stood. And then you really had to be careful with the exposure because it was a lot of, hot light coming in from the side. So I wasn't too sure exactly, whether I had nailed it or not. And I only had enough time to fire off a few bursts before this owl took flight and it was gone. But yeah, got kind of
Oh,
lucky,
super.
and definitely like the dramatic
Yep.
side lit. So a lot of people see this and think that I photographed this in the studio. So as
I'm
much
gonna
as I would love to take one of these home.
I'm gonna go ahead and pull up the next one now. I think we're in our final three because I layered this out so that my favorite three are in here. And I will tell you, you picked your favorite 10. My favorite image of yours is not in the 10. I have it. I didn't tell you. I have it put aside. I wonder if you can guess which one it is. It's actually the one that I think made me reach out to you because I was just like who the hell is this guy? Like yeah, he's good. But then I saw this and I'm like, this is the best of this species I've ever seen it. And I don't know what it was about. I went back and looked at it before the show and I'm like, it's not like dramatic. There's nothing like crazy happening, but it was so perfect, so clean. So we'll get to that in a minute, but these are my three favorite that you chose. So going to pick up the pace a little bit as we get close to the 1 hour mark. We've got the great gray owl. The composition on this, Kev, is just fantastic, like just beautiful.
Thanks, Scott. This was this was taken this year, and I really kind of struggled with figuring out what I can do a little bit differently, especially when you go back to photographing a species that you've done before.
Yep.
You're always kind of looking at sort of a different take that you can do, and just I don't know, trying to be a little bit more creative. This was really cool because this was a new area for me. I hadn't really explored here very much at all. And that's kind of what I've been trying to do this year, is spend a little bit more time in areas that are unfamiliar to me, and put a little bit more time in, maybe not coming home with as many images, but
Yep.
Just doing a little bit more footwork in finding new habitat areas.
Yep.
So I came across this owl totally unexpectedly. Of course, I was hoping to find some great grays in this area, but had never really found any in the past. So I was driving along this road, and this owl had actually been quite close, I guess, hunting in the grasses near the edge of the road, and heard the vehicle coming and took flight. And I assumed that, when I saw this gray, it was staying right at the edge of the forest. It wasn't coming out. A lot of times they'll come back out and carry on hunting right in front of you. This owl was definitely hiding, and I just assumed that it was hiding from me. And after a little bit of observation and hanging back, and I gave it lots of space, I noticed that there were two bald eagles circling above, and then it all kind of made sense. And you can see in this image the owl is looking toward the sky, and I'm not actually sure that it was me that flushed this owl out with my vehicle. I think it had taken notice of these bald eagles overhead.
Love it.
And it just retreated to the forest. And it was just I decided to do sort of a wider shot, and resisted that sort of urge that we often get to getting closer.
Yeah, and
I've been doing that a little bit more.
Yeah, with just in general, I think as people get more experience with photography and they start thinking about composition, they start feeling like it's a scene and not a subject. And I would just encourage people experiment. And I'm not saying everything has to be loose, but when you look at your feed, your social media feed or your website or whatever it is you're sharing, when you see these compositions mixed in, it really breaks up the portfolio, and it kind of adds some environment and some context. I think there's a story here, so when you tell the story, even better. Like I know he's looking up, but you tell the story, and now all of a sudden I think this is a beautiful image, Kev. So let me pull up this next one. Now this is a little bit tighter. Love the colors on this. I just absolutely love these like woodsy images. I love my songbirds to look like this, and then you get this little guy just perched, and this perch is like has this beautiful curve. He's at the bottom of the curve. There's a tree off to the left that gives a little bit of balance and offsets it. Just beautiful, man.
Thanks. Yeah, this was again, this is another pygmy owl, but this is actually a different subspecies. This is the northern pygmy owl from Vancouver Island. They're an endemic species to the island, and they have been blue listed as a species at risk. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that they're on an island, and the island has been heavily logged. So they're quite fragmented. And there's about, I think they estimate the numbers around 500 breeding pair left. It's very difficult to get information on pygmy owls in general, and especially this species. So although they don't look a lot different than the other ones, they do tend to have a little bit darker colors, and they're maybe a little bit smaller. It's hard to say. I always find their head shapes to be a little bit different. And I think this one is a juvenile because of the time of year that I would have photographed this. Normally I have no luck photographing pygmy owls around here in August, but this was on the island up at the north end. So I'm suspecting that this is a young northern Vancouver Island pygmy owl.
Yeah, just beautiful.
But it was kind of neat because I would been photographing this owl out in the open where they typically will perch like right at the top of a little fir tree or hemlock tree. And we've been following this guy around a little bit, and then he took off into the forest, and we thought, okay, that's, the show's over, right? And I walked up the road and found him perched here right at the edge, and initially wasn't really sure that this shot was going to work. And this was the first trip I had taken since getting the 500 f4, and shot this one on the D850. And I was really surprised. Once I actually took the image and looked at the back of my LCD, it was one of those moments where it's like, oh wow, there's something here, right? I can work with this. And then I was handheld. I had left the tripod behind down the road. So I really just had to hold my breath and hope that I could pull off, a few exposures that were going to work. So yeah, this was just kind of cool. I love the way the light was filtering through the background, and it was fun to get a shot of this particular species as well. So that was kind of fun.
Yeah, I love when the light is just, it's like in the forest and it feels right, and you get a little bit like filtering through, but it's not like spotty and hitting all over the place. That soft light is just really, really special. I think it's a perfect application for this portrait. And then you do have these kind of like up in the top left, there's like a little bit brighter area, but man, it's gorgeous. It is drop dead gorgeous. All right, I got the last one up here. Now I got to imagine this one did pretty good for you too. These look honestly, not the cutest thing I've ever seen. Like,
they're ugly.
You ever seen a baby barn owl, by the way?
Yes, baby barn owls. Yes.
Yeah. That may be the ugliest, one of the ugliest things ever. But these are a little bit cuter than baby barn owls, but they're not like, I don't know, maybe it's me. Maybe they're not the most, but I did list this as one of my favorites. I like the composition. They're still baby owls, right? Like they're still baby owls. Is this the same nest that the mom was in that was peeking out?
No, this is actually a different nest.
So this is a common structure for them to nest in then?
So they typically nest in sort of 3 different types of nests. The treetop nest is obviously the best for photography. If you can actually find gray owls nesting in a treetop nest, it definitely gives you better opportunities. A lot of times they'll take up a nest site where there may have been a red-tailed hawk or some other raptor that had been nesting in it, and they'll take over that nest in years where it's not being used. Those are really, really difficult nests to photograph. And a lot of times they'll just nest on a platform. We don't have any man-made platform nests here, but down in the States, I know there's quite a few that are just nesting on nest platforms.
Okay.
So yeah, to come across a natural, big old fir tree, that's broken off and has provided the best little sort of cavity for them is pretty cool. So this is, it's a different nest. This nest had 3 owlets in it, and this was a bit of a difficult nest to shoot because from the other side, which is the side that you would, most people would see and be able to photograph from, the background is quite close to the nest. So it doesn't really give you any separation.
Mm-hmm.
So although I took numerous photos, from that side, I didn't really love any of them, just because of the fact that I couldn't really get that background separation, and get everything kind of smooth. So in order to get this, I actually had to do a little bit of tree climbing. I was careful to not do it in a way that was going to, disrupt the owls or, completely freak mom out. By this point, these owls were quite used to us. We spent, the better part of 3 months following them from the time that they had just hatched to fledging. So the owls were not perceiving us as a threat in any way. So I was able to get up into a tree and photograph them at eye level, which is not always the easiest thing to do.
Couple people were asking about that. Because how high is this perch or this nest?
This is probably 20 feet or so off the ground. So normally you would be shooting at an angle, and this shot is just literally impossible to get from the ground, even on this side of the nest. It's just obscured. So yeah, it did require. When I did find these nests, I was immediately sort of thinking of ways that I could get a shot that would be unique, because I knew, I was shooting with other people, and I knew that we were all going to have similar images.
Right.
And most importantly, I just wanted to come away with something that was mine and that wasn't going to be, the same as everyone else.
Yeah.
So sometimes that means you have to think outside the box and approach things a little bit differently. But
you're not a professional photographer, right?
No, I'm not. I do this strictly as a hobby.
So you climb trees to shoot owls for fun? Yeah. just clarify. Just checking.
But it was kind of fun because it, like you said earlier, I am an outdoors person, and I was able to kind of couple my love for rock climbing, and I busted out the rock climbing harness, and I had my rope, and I didn't just hang myself in a tree and put myself at risk. I did take safety precautions, and I've had people ask me about that. How I did that, how I went about doing that. I wouldn't say that I recommend it to anyone.
Yeah, let's not advise
because that's definitely taking things to a different level.
Yeah, right.
But yeah, it is how I got this shot, which you wouldn't normally be able to get.
And I know there's some reward to that personally. I mean, I know when you do a little extra, you go a little further, things that other people may not be willing to do, to sacrifice. There's definitely a reward to that.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. But in doing it, you also get, you also get a lot of people that and I have to say, like, I've been inspired by other photographers to, looking at other people's work, it makes you realize that, you do sometimes have to look at things differently, and you do sometimes have to push the limits. And you're not going to get these shots, standing in the same position with your camera on the tripod all the time. That's going to give you a very different perspective.
Yeah. I'm going to pull up, Kevin, before we leave the show. First of all, great set, like great guest, amazing images. I'm pulling up a couple now. I just am going to highlight a few of these real quick. I don't know if you'll keep up. I got a great gray owl up now that I really liked of yours. I'm just on your Flickr page, but I want to get to the one. Yep. You've actually got a couple. You got some really nice landscapes in here. There's a little hummingbird. I think it's a Rufus hummingbird that's perched on this like moss. Really, really, really good.
Oh yeah,
that easily could have been in your top 10. So here's
what it was funny. I actually wound up focusing on the owls, because when I was trying to select, 10 images, I was going nuts. Like, I was like, what do I include? What do I not include? What can I, tell a story about? So it was really difficult. And this hummingbird was actually in my initial selection. And
I love
but
it.
I would have had to kind of really mix it up.
Out. Yeah.
And yeah, so it was just like, you know what? A lot of people that I've talked to and engaged with on Instagram have reached out out to me because of the owls.
Yeah.
So I thought it was an opportunity to
I think I think it was perfect. I think the audience, we have not done, just real quick while I'm pulling this up, just throw out a couple names of people that maybe specialize in owls that you look up to in photography, or that you connect with, or you just admire their work.
Oh, wow. Well, I mean, when it comes to owls, Jess Findlay is a well-known photographer here.
Fantastic.
And I've always admired his work. And down in Washington, Oregon, Adam Stunkel.
Yep. Great photographer. We've
also been a big fan of his work.
Yeah, I would like to get him on the show. He's actually in the Coast Guard. It's a little tough with schedule sometimes with him. But Jess Findlay, very popular, well-known photographer, probably one of the best. And if you're not following Jess, mandatory follow. Adam Stunkel, I wish I knew what his Instagram handle was. It used to be PDX Wild. It might still be. You might have changed it. I'm not sure, but just Google it.
I think it is.
Okay, PDX Wild, PDX maybe _ Wild, something like that. Terrific owl photographer. You shoot with a guy named,
and then of course,
Micheal Aagaard as well.
Yeah.
Yep.
I do. Yeah.
And he doesn't just do owls.
And he doesn't just do owls. I think when I first met him, I would say, most of his portfolio was pretty heavy on the owls. And that was definitely, one of his big interests, but we've shot together quite a bit. And he's really, I think when I look at photographers who have not really been doing photography for too long, Michael's one of those people that I think he really gets it.
Crazy learning curve on that dude.
And has shot right to the top.
Yep.
In a very short time.
I actually have him listed on the show. I think I've reached out to him probably the end of this year, maybe the beginning of next year. We're going to get him on.
Yeah, I mean, I was very lucky in that the owl that we started off with, the Pygmy owl, that was a trip that I had done over to visit him, and he had been trying to find these Pygmy owls over in his area where he was living, and just hadn't had a lot of luck. So we teamed up together, and we spent a little bit of time. So that was the result of sort of a team effort with Michael to get that shot.
All right, I'm going to pull up. First of all, before I pull up my favorite, somebody's guessing already. They said tanager. Yeah, a pretty good Western tanager up here. I see the one that's definitely my style. That's not the one I thought of. That's not the one that got my attention. Which one do you think it is?
Which one do I think it is?
Yeah.
I'll guess that it was an owl.
Okay, you are correct.
I'll guess that it was a short-eared owl.
Also correct.
And it's probably maybe the one that's perched out in the marsh. That's all wet.
All right, maybe. I'm going to pull it up now. So the West, by the way, I just looked at that Western tanager, sizzling hot, very, very good. There's another short-eared owl I liked. You know how every now and then these short-eared owls, I don't know, they just look different. You've got one. I'll pull it up. You'll probably see it on the replay. Every now and then you get one that has a really dark face. I don't know if it's a juvenile, but they're really dark. They look like Darth Vader to me. This is not my favorite. I have it up now, but I really liked this one. So it's a little delayed for you. You might be able to see it in a few seconds. I don't think that's the one you were talking about, but here's the one that got me. So this was the Kevin Lippe Get Scott. This thing is so freaking clean. It's ridiculous. The dark eyes, the wet owl. This guy's on like a little perch. I saw this thing. And like I said, man, I've been following you for a while at that point. And I saw this and I was like, all right, this is ridiculous. Like this guy's out of control. I'd kill for this. Like I'd kill. I never see, we've got a spot up here, a couple hours away, pretty popular for short-eared owls. So a lot of photographers end up there. And, I go up there like once a year just because it's a fun road trip. And, I get a couple, crappy short-eared owl images and nothing great. And I just want one to perch like this once in my life, just like this. Just look at me.
Yeah.
How good is that, man? God.
That particular one that you're looking at right now, I think it's the one you're looking at now, was kind of funny because we saw this owl. It had been hunting out in the marsh. It was a rainy day, and it landed on this on this particular snag, and we were a long distance away, and we were watching this owl. And we're like, do we take the time to walk out there? Because chances are by the time we get out there, it's not going to be there. So we stood around and we watched for a while, and then decided, okay, there's nothing else going on. Let's go see if we can get a bit closer. So we walked out and we went sort of, a little bit further out into the marsh, a little bit further, worked our way out. And the owl was quite content to just stay there. It was soaking wet. It had been a miserable morning, and it wasn't planning on flying anytime soon. It was just out there preening and drying off. And so we set up our tripods, and we're taking shots. And then, the next thing we know, we turn around, we look behind us. There's about 10 other photographers that have slowly made their way out and started to photograph this owl. So yeah, this one gave us ample opportunity to dial in all the settings. And I think this particular one was shot on the D5 with the 1.4 times converter, and was like full on mirror up. Yeah, lots of time to get good clean shots of this one.
Yeah, beautiful.
And I think the other one that you had brought up, that one was an older shot. So that was back when I was shooting Canon, and that was a shot that was taken really late in the evening. And you wouldn't really necessarily know that from the shot, but it was so dark that everybody had gone home. There wasn't anybody left around, and I just saw the short-eared owl perched amongst those. The marsh, and I worked my way into an area where I could actually get a clean shot, and I set up the tripod and I took a shot, and it was unbelievably high ISO. It was ridiculous. So I dialed everything down and busted out the remote shutter and took that. I think it was around 2 seconds.
Oh my God.
It was one of those like Hail Mary shots.
Yeah.
And it worked. Like I actually, I think out of maybe 30 shots, I think I had 3 that I felt were keepers.
Amazing.
It was pretty cool. But yeah, that shot was taken just after the sun dropped below the horizon.
Yeah. And I will tell people, like don't think it's over when you think it's over. There are so many great shots that can happen. Now you will need the right equipment. So I don't shoot off a tripod, but if I'm shooting owls, I always keep a tripod. I normally do shoot like portraits off of like owl portraits because they're not really moving. I'll throw the tripod up, but it's a great example. You can't get this shot handheld. It's literally physically impossible to shoot, probably over 1/10 of a second handheld, no matter what kind of vibration reduction.
Oh yeah.
So, but on a tripod with a shutter release, you can go a second, half a second, and you set up to 2 seconds. You can do that. I know a guy that'll shoot owls at 2 to 3 second exposures, but you cannot even touch the shutter. You could maybe do a delay shutter where, you're clicking it and it counts off 5 or 10 seconds and then shoots. So the vibration is gone from the camera, but literally, if the wind is blowing too hard, you can't get the shot. So, really beautiful, man.
No, that's the one nice thing about an owl versus a warbler.
Yes. You don't get 2 seconds for a warbler.
This owl would go, just the longest time. I was really more, worried about wind and anything else, but the owl they can be so perfectly still that I've seen some shots around 8-10 seconds. Yeah. Especially with the screech owls. It's crazy.
All right. Well, we're going to wrap up, and we went a little over an hour. I'm sorry for the audience. They were all engaged. Nobody dropped off. So I know they were loving the shots. I will tell you this, Kevin, if you ever want to come to the East Coast, I got like a bunch of bedrooms upstairs. You're welcome to have a spot. In return, I don't remember if you read the contract that we signed for the show, but I also get to come anytime to British Columbia. I get to stay at your house for free. And you get to show me every owl spot you've ever had. So I don't know if you read the fine print in the contract, but that's all in there. So you're legally obligated for that.
It actually sounds like a pretty good deal, Scott.
All right, man. All right, I'm gonna head out. I'm not gonna mute you, but I'm gonna play this little thing that I play at the end. Don't say any words because they'll come through on the final audio. I want to thank the audience for jumping in tonight. Love the show. Really, really interesting stuff. And Kevin, just beautiful work. And as always, I'm a fan. So have a great night, man.
Thanks so much, Scott.
Are you there?